Hello, everybody. Good day. I'm very pleased. My name is to be here. It's Philip Johnston. I'm the CIO of the National Research Council and also the president of the CIO Association of Canada. We would have had Sherry Henderson here, the acting assistant director of requirements at CSIS, as our moderator and opening up the panel. Unfortunately, we're just having issues connecting with her. So today I'll just take over on the fly, like we need to do so many times when we're talking about research and security, and be the panelist and the moderator at the same time. So maybe I get the luck of not having to answer so many questions if I take that role, and maybe that's why I raised my hand to take over this morning to take on that role. But in any case, I'm very pleased to be here at this panel, and how Canada and its allies are responding to the issue of research security. Research security refers to measures that can protect the inputs and outputs and processes of research from unauthorized access and knowledge transfer. It's a really important topic, both domestically and has definite international interest as well. Today, we have a session where we've got experts, I guess, including myself, from institutions and governments from Canada, the UK, the US, and Australia to reach out and talk about what each of these countries is doing in terms of identifying, managing of potential security risks to research integrity. So the aim of this panel is to highlight the strategies that might enhance research security while maintaining open and collaborative research environments. Balancing those two needs is always really difficult for all of our countries. And to ensure the research is open and as open as possible, and that we have the necessary security to protect it. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of the folks to introduce themselves and talk about what they're doing within, like, a quick intro within their countries, and to just give us a feeling for what's going on there. So I'm going to start with Rebecca Spike. She is the Chief Research Security Strategy Policy at the National Science Foundation. Rebecca, welcome to the panel, and maybe you could give us a quick intro about what's going on where you're at in your own neck of the woods.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I am Rebecca Kaiser. I'm and my nickname is Spike, which is also my maiden name and makes me sound quite tough. But I'm with the U.S. National Science Foundation as the Chief of Research, Security, Strategy, and Policy. This is a position that we created in March of 2020, relatively new. And before that, I was the head of the Office of International Science and Engineering. We felt strongly that the International Office should be separate from the Research Security Office because we want to make sure that we encourage international collaboration, principled international collaboration, which is part of the underpinning of how science works and should continue to be encouraged from the risks of research security, which often have to do with undue foreign government influence on research. NSF receives about 41,000 proposals every year, and we're only able to fund about 20% of those. And so if someone applies for a grant and they give inaccurate, incomplete, or inconsistent information to us, then they are receiving a grant unfairly. And many who did apply using fair and appropriate and transparent information may not get that grant. And so the whole system of merit-based competition can be compromised. So at NSF, we work with our other agency partners to coordinate and understand the risks of research security and emphasize the principles of research integrity. We're doing a few things through the interagency effort in the US that I wanted to quickly mention. The first is in January 2021, we released the National Security Presidential Memo 33, NSPM 33. And this memo outlines very clearly what research integrity is, what research security is, and what the roles and responsibilities are of the different agencies that are involved in research security in the US, as well as the roles and responsibilities of research organizations and researchers. We also released at that time a recommended practices document for researchers and research organizations. Currently, under this administration, we're in the process of developing implementation guidance for this memo. And the implementation guidance focuses on three areas. First of all, harmonization of disclosure policies. So we want to be clear, of course, that researchers need to disclose and be transparent so that we can understand and resolve conflicts of commitment. And we want to make sure that we are harmonized in the US government so that we have similar disclosure policies. The second area is being clear about consequences for violations. Every incident of violation is different, and so the consequences may vary. However, we want to be clear about what those potential consequences are and also what the mitigating factors could be to mitigate those consequences. And the third area is we are requiring every university receiving $50 million or more in federal funding to have a research security program. And so we outline what that means. What should be the elements of a research security program at research organizations and universities? So we're expecting this implementation guidance to be released in the next few weeks. And I think this will provide even more clarity to the community. So I'll end it there and can talk more in the Q&A.
Thanks, Rebecca. Much appreciated. We'll go down to our friendly neighbors down the south of the equator in Australia. Mel, Southwell Lee, could you please provide a quick introduction?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Philippe. So I will note that it's about 12:37 a.m. at the moment. So if I fade through the course of this session, please forgive me. It is usually my bedtime. So I'm joining you from the Australian Research Council, which isn't a policy agency. It's a grant funding body. But given that we're the largest grant funding, non-medical grant funding body in Australia for research programs, we obviously have a role to play in kind of understanding and implementing the Australian government policy in relation to research security. So what is that kind of landscape? It's very jointly developed. A real sort of feature of the process over the last couple of years has been the establishment of something called the Universities Foreign Interference Task Force. It's a joint group of universities and government agencies of various levels and of various kind of different types of agency. They developed some guidelines to counter foreign interference in Australian university research. There was a first iteration that came out in 2019, I believe, and they've just put out a refreshed version about a week ago. So those are collaboratively written, and they set out kind of the principles basically for risk management and developing a robust system. They're intended to be a kind of practical framework for universities to apply and to help them to understand proportionality and the particular types of risks that those institutions might face given the wide variety of research that's undertaken in different places, the different kinds of partnerships and so forth. The guidelines have sort of four key elements, the refreshed guidelines that just came out: governance and risk frameworks, communication and education, due diligence, which is, you know, the sort of checking process just mentioned, and cybersecurity. Over the top of that, another kind of recent policy development in Australia has been the release by our Prime Minister, also last week, it was a busy week, of a blueprint for critical technologies. And that's an important lens that we put over research security and research integrity in Australia at the moment. We define critical technologies as those that are, and I'm going to look at the definition for this, current and emerging technologies that have the capacity to significantly enhance or pose risk to our national interest. So when we look at research security issues at the moment, we often bring that lens over it. So those are the technologies that might be of most national benefit, but they might also be the ones that are considered most attractive to interference or kind of as a target. So we bring that lens into our processes as well. So in the ARC, we run a lot of funding schemes. We've implemented the guidelines through our kind of programs. So we ask, the standardized kind of disclosure questions that Rebecca was just referring to. We have a sort of set of those in those guidelines, and we have a very slightly adapted version that goes into our funding guidelines and our funding agreements. We also look at, as I said, the research that particularly touches on those critical technologies where we see there as being kind of higher exposure risk there. So yeah, generally it's a pretty collaborative exercise. It's an evolving space. So we're all kind of learning along the way. We've got established practices we always had in relation to things like dual purpose technology and other forms of kind of foreign investment and so forth. But there's been a great deal of collaborative maturation of our knowledge and capacity over the last couple of years. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mel. Really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us in the wee hours of the morning. As you can see behind me, I'm in Ottawa, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, balmy -5 degrees Celsius. So we're very fortunate here in Ottawa, at least have the sun. The next speaker on our panel is Mark Ruglis, who's the head of research and security within the Directorate of International Research and Innovation from the UK. Mark, could you please say a few words, please?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I actually work in the government department called the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, so it's a bit of a policy smorgasbord. But we're the department that funds the large majority of government-funded scientific research in the UK. And we really have the lead on how to address this particular policy challenge. And it is difficult to meet the challenge of supporting open scientific discourse and protect or ensure the right protections are in place. We much appreciate this opportunity to explore understanding of the issues and ways to work through this challenge in the right format, I think. The threats to research that we see are primarily theft, misuse or exploitation of information, and they're evolving, growing and increasingly complex. And earlier this year and last year, there was wide reporting of the cyber attacks that our research institutions developing COVID vaccines were receiving, and we had to move very fast to provide the right defenses for that vital work. These threats are serious, but the pandemic has shown the demonstration of the value and necessity of international collaboration. We have identified troubling cases where valuable information has been stolen from our universities through a range of espionage techniques. And we also see open collaborations which on close examination give us concerns about the final application of the technology being developed. In terms of challenges within this approach of being both open and secure, we recognise that the UK academic institutions from which most of our research takes place are highly autonomous and have certain academic freedoms protected in law. In most cases, they're registered as charities, and academic freedom is a great strength of our system. The UK government is determined to support this principle and work collaboratively with the research community in order to implement measures that promote collaboration and manage risks. We're quite clear that a top-down approach simply will not work and risks doing damage to vital relationships. That's why our focus over the last 18 months has been on expanding our sector engagement work. In 2019, the government published Trusted Research, which is practical advice for institutions on how to manage risks within international partnerships. We've also supported the sector representative body, Universities UK, on the development of their own security guidelines, and that was published last October 2020. A significant recent announcement has been the creation of a new research collaboration advice team within my department. This team, which we're currently recruiting, will have members based across the UK, whose role it will be to directly support academic research institutions to help embed good practice and support decision-making around international research collaboration. This team will have some capability just after Christmas, and we hope to have all 15 of the team in place by this time next year. And we created that team in direct response to the research community's plea for direct support from government to help them manage the issues. And they needed a single point of contact rather than going on a shopping expedition around various government departments. We know there's also work to do in the commercial research sector, particularly with small and medium-sized enterprises, and information to support those companies was published in August under the banner of Trusted Innovation, and work continues to promote this practice. Most of the science research in the UK that's government funded is administered via our agency, UK Research and Innovation, and we've worked with them to amend the terms and conditions of research grants. We now require evidence that due diligence checks have been made, and where risks are identified, appropriate mitigations have been put in place. It's too early to see what the effect of these requirements will have, but we will monitor the situation closely. We're quite clear that there's no single measure that will effectively mitigate all the risks in international collaboration. From a legislative perspective, it's important to take a holistic approach and assess the combined effectiveness of all the tools that are available. And it's important to test new proposals with the research community before we go through to the legislative process. Monitoring and evaluating the impact of both legislation and non-legislative tools is crucial, as this will tell us if the measures in hand are sufficient, and if not, what additional measures might be required. This graduated and proportionate approach will help to ensure that we minimise the risk of unintended consequences, and the UK government is also acutely aware of the bureaucratic burden that researchers can face. It's important that we look for opportunities to align international activity wherever possible, as this provides great protection for all. There's a great deal of good work going on in public and in private, and for like-minded countries, being able to speak clearly with one voice on this topic is incredibly powerful. I'll stop there, but I look forward to discussing this subject a bit later on.
Thank you, Mark. I can see that Sherry has now joined us as our moderator, so that's awesome. Maybe I'll just finish off by introducing myself, and then Sherry, you can just take on over from me. Is that okay, Sherry? Okay.
Absolutely. Well, thanks.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm the Chief Information Officer for the National Research Council. About 2,500 researchers that work on various topics, issues, some less sensitive, some more sensitive than others. And I've only been here for the last 6 months. From a perspective of why this issue is very important, I had the opportunity on Monday to have a fireside chat with Dr. John Chen, the CEO of BlackBerry, who also expressed his thoughts about at least the Canadian perspective on IP, intellectual property, research, and how important it is in a knowledge-based economy these days to be able to keep that internally within your economy so that you can grow and have proper prosperity for your citizens. So I think that's the reason we're here, is to talk about, that great research that all of us in our countries. And, I guess maybe we forgot New Zealand, but New Zealand will be here maybe at some point in time. And I'm sure they're doing some great things too. When I look at the Five Eyes countries, the piece here is that it's very critical. And I've been around for the last 6 or 7 months as the CIO. And it's in fact a really important issue that we're needing to deal with right away at the National Research Council. The piece, I guess I'll say, is it's not an easy subject to tackle. If you want to do it right, to get the right balances between security and openness, it costs money. You need either processes, technologies, people, education on the research side, and also on the information technology side to make this, truly a good balance between security and open collaboration. And I guess I'll say that we're putting in place a lot of the plans at the NRC to move forward in that direction, to balance those two kind of items, security and collaboration from the researcher perspective. We've got funding, which is what's required to make this real. We're looking at very different and unique technologies that might support the balance. And I'm looking forward, as part of this panel, to maybe talk a little bit more about what those opportunities are in how we can possibly move forward with that balance. Thank you very much. And over you to Sherry.
That. I do apologize, everyone, for the slight technical glitch this morning, but we're all very flexible, and thanks very much to Philip for carrying on for us. I'm going to start. I do have some opening remarks, and I'm going to start with those, and then we'll start the question session. I would really like to thank very much all of our panelists. I was able to hear what you were saying, even though you couldn't see me at that point, but really, I think we have an excellent group of panelists with us this morning, and I think we're going to have a fabulous discussion as we move forward. So I'll just make a few comments in regards to research security, because it's an issue gaining greater attention both in Canada and around the globe. For those of us new to the topic, research security really is about protecting research and know-how from potential theft, misuse, or exploitation by those who would seek to acquire information and intellectual property for their own benefit, and potentially to the detriment of all the researchers and to our national security and prosperity. Research security is distinct but related to research integrity. Research integrity is conducting research in a way which allows others to have trust and confidence in the methods used and the findings that result. Thus, ensuring research security is critical in maintaining the integrity of our research. Governments and research funders remain committed to the open and collaborative research environments that are necessary to advance research knowledge. However, we do know that there are those who seek to exploit this very openness for national or competitive advantage. Countries with strong research ecosystems are particularly likely to be targeted, and I think we're all represented here today. And the shift to remote work has really exacerbated this threat by providing new vulnerabilities and opportunities for compromise. Protecting research should be done in a manner that supports open and collaborative research practices and relationships, and preserves the norms of ethical, transparent, and independent research. The goal of research security measures in Canada is to ensure that research is as open as possible and as secure as necessary. During this panel, we're going to hear from our experts from the various countries who have already introduced themselves, and how their governments and funding agencies are handling the identification and management of potential threats to research security. The Government of Canada has publicly cautioned that misuse of research by some state-backed or affiliated entities presents a threat to the integrity of Canadian research, to our innovation prospects, and to national security. It's in the knowledge-based economy, the most valuable national economic and security assets are intellectual property and data. The exfiltration of these knowledge assets through clandestine or deceptive means constitutes a pressing national security concern, particularly if the knowledge is sensitive or has possible military, intelligence, or surveillance applications. Some countries are using all levers of their state power, including using their powerful intelligence services to pursue their geopolitical interests, and this has only increased in scope during the pandemic. Advanced research and big data, primarily in STEM fields, have never been more prized, and those involved in that sector's discovery and innovation have never been more targeted. Working remotely via unsecured virtual networks, for example, can increase vulnerabilities to cyber espionage and the theft of research. This is particularly true when that work involves collaboration with international partners, based in countries whose legal and regulatory regimes do not recognize principles of academic freedom and proprietary rights. Our objective in introducing research security measures in response to this threat is not to hamper international scientific and research collaboration, but rather to ensure that the research community, R&D, and significant investments are protected against threat actors who might choose to exploit our knowledge for their own national, strategic, or economic advantage. Canada's approach is not targeted at specific countries or entities. Risks could come from anywhere. Our goal is to integrate security due diligence into normal research processes. Protecting our assets today will allow our research and innovation sectors to grow and flourish into the future. Academic research can be open and collaborative, while still ensuring that privacy, security, ethics, and intellectual property safeguards are in place. Speaking from a national security perspective, these protections are intended to benefit both Canada and the research community by ensuring that the funders and researchers directly involved in research and knowledge development retain the ability to benefit from the work that they are advancing. My organization, CSIS, I should have introduced that right off the bat. Sorry, that's the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, Canada's domestic intelligence service. We're publicly and significantly involved in bolstering research security. CSIS contributes to enhanced awareness of the threat to research institutions and actively contributes in the prevention, detection, and mitigation of further research theft and misuse with our partners. So I'm looking very forward to hearing about all the approaches taken by our other countries and organizations. We've heard a little bit in the introductions. I really think we can all benefit from the sharing of best practices and lessons learned. So I'm going to open up to the questions now, but I have, maybe to kick us off, just a question to start the day. And perhaps I'll start off with you, Philip, being the other Canadian representative. But what I would say how do you balance the goals of open science and research security in an increasingly collaborative and global research environment?
Thanks, Sherry. That's a great intro to describe the problem at hand. So within the National Research Council, we have sensitive research, I guess I'll call it that, and less sensitive research. In terms of balancing the need for collaboration internally and externally, this is something actually we're kind of presently working on. And I talked a little bit about the fact that it's you need funding, you need to be organized, you need to have the right governance, you need to have I guess I'd say the discipline as well to move forward with this. So I think the first piece is about education. I'll probably talk about 2 or 3 things in terms of balancing the need for openness and security. First thing is education, training, and awareness. And I think making security a bit more top of mind for the researchers, like what could happen, what might happen, what potentially has happened. For example, if you've had an issue or an incident within your country about a certain piece of research that may have been targeted, using the researchers themselves to provide lessons learned and education and awareness to all the other researchers within your area. So I think education, training, awareness, and just making security a little bit more top of mind in terms of what could or might happen. And in fact, I think maybe scaring a little bit is a little bit of an area as well. That what is the potential impact of potentially some of your research, even for those people that may have non-sensitive research. Ransomware attacks. I know that there potentially have been some, maybe in the UK, on educational areas where there was research happening. And so that, even though it's not sensitive, it just prevents you from actually moving forward with your research. So that's, I think, the first one. Second one is, I think you need to have a really modern, I would say, technologically kind of advanced team that can look at the most modern ways you can solve problems, and as well applying sort of the processes and the people piece of it to be able to be a little bit more innovative in order to mitigate risks from a security perspective, while as well allowing for that flexibility and that openness. So, I mean, you need active, smart people actually looking at this problem, just like you have active, smart researchers, and looking for innovative ways and looking for different ways, and having the security people there as long with the researchers to solve the problems and work through what could be new ways of delivering research in a secure and collaborative way. So within the NRC, those are kind of the two things we're kind of focused on. We've got a program and a project that's allowing us to work through a lot of these issues hand in hand with the right security organizations within Canada, within the internal groups of the VPs of research at the NRC, and as well with our Government of Canada Treasury Board, central manager of the Government of Canada as well, for policies that we might need to look into to update based on these. So policies could be something as well, a side effect, I guess, looking at different policies that we might need to update in order to enable this. So I think that's a simple, quick answer for your first question, Sherry. Hope it helps.
Thanks. No, I think that was a great answer. Thank you very much for that. I'm actually going to pass the mic over perhaps to Mel to get your perspective on this question. Would you like me to repeat it, or are you okay? Oh, can't hear you.
Nope.
Oh. Nope, still can't hear you. Sorry, Mel. Maybe while we're figuring that out, I'll actually get Rebecca to answer the question as well.
Sure. So the way I view it is that research security is actually a means of protecting the openness of our research environment. We want to make sure that we don't respond, in my view, to concerning undue foreign government interference by closing off any areas of research, because the research needs to be open. We need to be able to share the results, share our findings, so that other researchers can improve upon them, can challenge them, can replicate them, and that's how innovation happens. And so the main way I view protecting the openness of our system is by, first of all, focusing on transparency. We need to make sure that we understand the affiliations and sources of funding of all the players in the research ecosystem so that we can resolve these potential conflicts of interest and conflicts of commitment. Second of all, we need to make sure that our international collaborations truly are collaborative. We've developed a series of questions. We call it the International Collaboration Catechism that one can ask to make sure that it really is an international collaboration and not something that might be masking itself as such a collaboration. And these are questions such as making sure you can describe the engagement succinctly and without jargon. And are the terms of the engagement made clear in writing? Have all the participants been identified? And are all the participants known to the researcher and to the researcher's institution? Are all the participants' conflicts of interest and commitment documented? Are there any aspects of the engagement that are not to be disclosed? And if so, why not? And is there any aspect of the engagement that seems unusual, unnecessary, or poorly specified? We also need to make sure that we know where the funding and the other resources needed for the activity come from. And is it clear what each party is providing? There are a series of other questions as well, and I'm happy to provide these questions to the audience and whomever would like them. But I think if we think intentionally and strategically and ask these types of questions, we can help mitigate a lot of the risks that are available in the system. I think something that we should try to avoid as much as possible is employing classification or other export control means unless absolutely necessary. Um, sometimes they are necessary, and we need to be conscious if any of our research is dual use, can be used for military or concerning purposes, and take appropriate measures if that's the case. However, I think in the areas of basic and fundamental research, we have to proceed in a way where we understand our partnerships, but maintain the openness of this system while having the appropriate security measures in place. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
I'm just going to remind the viewing audience that if you would like to ask questions, you should be able to type them into a live Q&A and they'll pop up on my screen and I can and pose them to the panelists for you. We'll try Mel again and see if we can get a response from you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Excellent.
Great. All right. Excellent. So, look, I think the points raised by both the panelists already are relevant in the Australian sense as well. I talked about the guidelines for countering foreign interference that we have. They set out some principles and some guidance and some frames to put over the research that's undertaken and the mitigations that you might be able to put in place to help manage those. I think one of the key things in the guidelines for us is the concept that just because something might be perceived to have a level of risk attached to it doesn't mean that you need to stop that type of research or not fund that type of research. It's about how you manage the risks that might be associated with that particular form of research in that particular collaboration or in that particular way. So I think recognising that and encouraging our scientists and our researchers to understand that it doesn't necessarily mean that research doesn't go ahead. We just need to put some additional layers on it and be strategic and mindful about how that research is conducted. Thanks.
Much. So Mark, you're up next to answer the question.
Thank you. I think the key thing for us in the UK is education, which leads to wise decision making rather than us telling researchers what they should be doing, because only they really know what the potential applications of some of their topics are. But education takes quite a long time because we're talking about changing the culture within research institutions and within faculties and schools and research laboratories. And we're presenting our campaign really as the changing culture that came 30 years ago with health and safety legislation. And there are lots and lots of very dangerous things that can happen in research laboratories. And people now understand that they have an obligation to make sure that they conduct their research safely just for their own staff. And we're using that as a model to try and to change people's thinking. But there's a longer term aspect to this as well, is that I think you can more easily convince people to think about the opportunity that's being presented to them now and what does that mean. But it's harder to think about what the longer term implications of some of these opportunities and collaborations are, and helping the institution's management to think through some of those longer term risks is also pretty important to us. Thanks.
That I think that's such an issue that we're dealing with. So true, is trying to make sure that we set in place today, which will facilitate our ability to do research and innovate, but also protect our long-term interests. And funding is such a huge piece of that, and where we're getting the funding from. So thanks very much for all your responses. I'm going to go to another question now. So what do you think are the biggest challenges and considerations related to implementing research security measures in your organizations and countries? And maybe this time we'll start right off with you, Mel.
Get the sound right.
I can hear you.
Excellent. All right. I've got my button clicking down now. Look, I think the increasing awareness piece, as others have raised, is a huge one. And I think that in addition to the excellent points raised, it comes at a time where, certainly in the Australian context, it's really been evolving over the last couple of years. And I heard from some of the dates in the initial presentations by panelists, 2019, 2020, 2021, big years in terms of big policy developments, big announcements of frameworks and guidelines and implementation guides and so forth. That's all come at a time when researchers are under stress and under strain and operating in a very uncertain environment. So I think the education piece is even tougher because there's only so much left in the tank to deal with all the other changes that are happening. So certainly in the Australian context, that's one of the biggest challenges. That structurally, the senior leadership and so forth have been able to absorb some of those changes and understand that within institutions, new systems need to be put in place and new checks and balances need to be there. But I think in terms of that really filtering down into, as you say, kind of common practice like we deal with WHS or HNS matters, it will take a little while, certainly in our context, to have that filter through, particularly given that sort of change fatigue. Thanks.
Change fatigue is an issue I think we're dealing with across all of our organizations at the moment. Okay, I'm going to actually ask Phil if you would mind answering that question now.
Thanks, Sherry. I like to keep things simple, so I'll say two things. One is funding. Like to do it well and to do it with the proper balance. I talked about being, and I'm going to just repeat it, to be innovative in the way you can maybe achieve these objectives. You need funding and you need smart people to do this. So, definitely at the NRC, we're starting to put that plan together in terms of how much funding might be required to do this appropriately for our researchers. Obviously, we'll be working with other partners. Maybe there's ways we can solve the problems, internally within other Government of Canada science-based departments, and maybe with other countries as well, like in terms of sharing enterprise-wide solutions that we only have to build once in a kind of a cloud framework or an open framework, but can be leveraged and applying good identity and authentication principles that would enable us to share more across our organization. So funding to do that is not inexpensive, and if it is a true priority, hopefully the governments around the world will figure out we need to put money towards this. So that would be the one. The second piece is really putting the researchers first. And I've coined the term since I've arrived called research as a service. So what can the CIO or the technology people create in terms of self-service, making it simple for people to still get access to services that they require. And I think Mark mentioned a number of those services, but at a touch of a finger, be able to add new researchers from outside of their country, quickly evaluate their security clearance, with something quick and efficient, then allowing them into the virtual labs that we may want to work on. Or another idea would be, how do we create a virtual lab that has access to high performance computing? In terms of the data, how do we share the data quickly and efficiently? So the second piece I would say is figuring out the ability to deliver that security in a way that improves, I think somebody mentioned, improves the opportunities for researchers to collaborate and access research functions that they want to access quickly and efficiently in a digital way. And I think if those two things, those are the two, I would say, top things that, from my perspective, I've got to try to solve. And if we can do that, then I think, we'll be able to not only protect the research that is happening in our countries, but also make it easier for the researchers to do that research. And I think that's an important priority, at least for me at the NRC. Thank you.
I have to agree that to try and keep the security practices top of mind, but simpler to manage. So we aren't putting blockages, but just supporting the work that's happening and making sure it's done in a protective bubble. If that makes any sense. Okay, Mark, I'm going to you next for your response to that question.
My co-panelists have already talked quite a bit about the importance of education. I think I'll just overlay on that the concerns we've got about imposing additional burdensome processes on researchers. I'm just frankly so depressed about the number of applications the researcher has to make in order to be confident they'll get one research grant back. And I can't remember what the ratio is, but it's not very encouraging at the moment in the UK. And we're running a review at the moment led by a university vice chancellor on the whole bureaucracy around funding research in the hope that we can find ways of making it simpler. And at the same time, we recognize there's going to be a bit of process around some of these things. associated with research security, but we're clear that creating new checklists and whole reports of things for your faculty or your research team is really not going to encourage people in the great endeavor that we all really want to support. So it's keeping the process under control is one of my goals. Thanks.
And Rebecca, is there anything you would like to add to that discussion?
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is we still have many in the research community who just don't believe that there is a problem. They see us as doing academic research. It's open. What's the issue here? And when we have taken action, a lot of times it is there's concern that we're taking action because of clerical errors. So something that I think we do have to emphasize is the fact that this is more than clerical errors on research applications. There is a lot of substantial concern that is happening here. It was hard for me to believe as well a few years ago, and now I see the challenge, and it really is there. We're doing some analytics at the National Science Foundation to try to understand the scale and the scope of the issues. And we're requesting authority to be able to compare what's disclosed to NSF with what's available in publications and open source databases so that we can uncover undisclosed dual affiliations, undisclosed sources of funding. We've piloted this effort and we have found that there is about an 8% non-disclosure rate of these dual affiliations and sources of funding. We do need to understand why that's the case. We know that research security issues certainly play a large part, and a large part of this is malign foreign government talent recruitment programs where researchers sign contracts that often have non-disclosure clauses in them in exchange for funding and status. And that's something that we really do need to address as a substantial risk. On the other hand, we do have several universities in the US who are stepping up. It's a challenge, of course, because in academia, faculty members are expected to be entrepreneurs, expected to go out and find sources of funding, do challenging research. And I think that we are having to focus on a culture change here, where universities are needing to find out more and emphasize more transparency for their faculty members. And that's something that no one is used to. And so we need to make sure that we do this without imposing additional administrative burden, as Mark mentioned, because certainly we need disclosure, we need transparency, we need to understand what's happening. But we know that that does go along with an increased burden here. So we need to understand what is happening, but be conscious of that as well. Thanks.
I think the theme that came out of that question really is we have to find a way to make everybody security aware, because there's still a lot of denial perhaps, or not denial, but lack of awareness, let's just say. And we need to find a way to do it, to make them aware, but also whatever processes or policies are put in place do not stop the research or make the administrative burden so heavy that nothing's going to get done, because we can't afford that either. So thank you very, very much for your answers on that question. I do have another question here for the panel. What best practices or lessons learned would you share with research institutions and funders in integrating research security practices into their activities? And I'll go to you to start on this one, Mark, if that's all right.
Sure, although I don't think I've got a very adequate answer, in that we don't actually have a way of measuring the impact of the various best practices that are being pushed through at the moment. Our universities are telling us that they're making big changes, and they're sending us examples of where they've made decisions that they probably wouldn't have made 3 years ago. But in terms of specific best practices beyond the advice that we posted online, the trusted research advice that I mentioned earlier. I haven't got any specific. What I'm hopeful is that this new team, which we're putting in place at the moment, working hand in glove with specific universities in each field officer's territory, is really going to make the biggest difference in terms of uptake of the advice and changing the culture in the organizations. But ask me this in 12 months' time, and I hope I'll have a good story to tell you.
To come back on a panel in 12 months. We'll keep the discussion
sure.
moving forward.
Delighted to.
Yeah, I think we're going to be discussing this topic for quite a while to come now as we move forward. I'm going to ask Phil if you would like to give your thoughts or comments on that question.
Sure. I really liked Rebecca's answer on the previous one. I know, and I'm sure, Sherry, you're aware in Canada that one of the things we're doing, because I was the CIO of NSERC, which are the granting councils for Canada, where we give out $2-3 billion worth of money to researchers to do work. And now they've stated that all those grants, I think they didn't add too much administrative burden, but they asked a few questions around the security piece around those grants that now have to be answered. The process, I would say, when I looked at it, was already very cumbersome and administratively difficult for a researcher. Before that, adding 2 or 3 questions, I think, didn't add more than what was already there. And yeah, I just thought I'd answer that question, the previous one. Internally at the NRC, where we have about 2,500 researchers, again, like funding, like if you want to do research securely and do it well, you're going to need money to do that. But I'll spin the funding in this perspective. At the NRC, I won't say the exact number, but researchers can put together servers, they can put together networks, they can be system administrators, they have PhDs, they're extremely smart people, and they've been having to do this for a very, very long time. So if you have thousands of servers and computers and research functions in your environment, it is even impossible to have like proper, like a normal corporate network, like your enterprise network, where you have, rules, you have back office system admins, you have, people on the enterprise managing these systems. Well, on the secure research network, I think that at least I guess I'll say, I think I won't say about our capabilities, but how many people would we need to actually make that secure to manage that environment of thousands of servers? I mean, I think we're all struggling with that issue and that problem. It's about capacity and resources to actually do it right. So lessons learned in my 7 or 8 months, the only way you can probably solve this problem is by empowering the researchers. And we talked about education and training. How can you provide the right guidance, the right ConOps, the right methods that they can start to learn, like the enterprise methods of dealing with systems and networks and computers and the research, the data, et cetera. So I think that's where probably we need to go. That's the only answer from a capacity and funding perspective. And so then from that perspective, empowering the researchers in terms of the right way to do things, educating them on how to do it securely, and then auditing. I think instead of actually having your own people doing it, how could you then put in ways of monitoring or auditing that is automated? So again, back to the innovation of how we do this. How can we put in place those things that are kind of hanging around in the back end that give us, a perspective, either in real time or every 6 months or in a year, about how those systems are being managed, how those systems are being patched, what type of software is there on those systems. So I think there's a long way on the technology back-end digital front that could probably help us solve these problems on the monitoring, similar to what we have on our normal networks, where everybody has a SIM, which is an event monitoring system, a security incident event monitoring system on our corporate networks. What could we do to pull that down to the researcher level? And so I think that would be a great lessons learned to be able to monitor like what's happening there, and hopefully advise the researchers when we see something special or unique or not right. instead of trying to build out a whole enterprise function for thousands of servers with thousands of researchers, there is no capacity potentially to do that. So it's a funding issue, and then figuring out how we can still do the monitoring accurately with innovative and AI-based tools in order to be on top of what could be happening very quickly. So that is, I think, a lessons learned for all of us that we could probably think about in terms of which research and virtual digital labs are in place. Thanks.
Very much for that answer. Any comments from your perspective, Rebecca?
So I think that asking the international collaboration catechism type questions, I think, is a very good step. I think there are several universities in the U.S., for instance, MIT, that has a risk assessment council. And so faculty members are not obligated to go to this council, but they can if they're wanting to enter into an international relationship, but they're not quite sure if it's risky or if it's okay. They can go to this council for that type of consultation. I think that's a really good best practice that we should put into place. I think also we have a model called the ISAC for cybersecurity, which is Information Security Advisory Committees. And these are committees that are set up to, again, share information about information security. I think this is a good model for thinking about sharing information on research security issues. The last thing that I'll mention is I think we need to work on this with like-minded partners. We need to work on this internationally together. There is a G7 group on research security and research integrity. I represent the US on this group. And we're coordinating together on principles and best practices, as well as hopefully a research security toolkit that will involve things that we can all use to mitigate the risks of research security. We need to make sure, of course, that we have a way of spreading the word about these tools that we're hoping to make available. And we probably are going to need to think about funding for how we're going to help research organizations in implementing these tools. It's necessary, but as we said, it's going to be a lot of effort, and especially our smaller universities are going to need some type of help in this regard. Thank you.
I think you're right. I think we are going to have to start getting our head around how we support these universities through funding, et cetera, et cetera. Mel, anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I think I'd just echo Mark's starting point in that to really capture best practice, it would be we need to sort of understand what the metrics are and have enough time passed to kind of see what the results are. Obviously, that overlaid in an increasingly kind of changing environment, so hard to kind of establish what those metrics might look like first up. So in and of itself, perhaps that's a lesson learned as we kind of embark upon this journey to think about how we would know what success looks like along the way. I mean, we know what failure looks like in some of the most kind of obvious instances, but what would a successful system look like, and how would we kind of measure that we're tracking along that, and that we have the right players kind of playing their role in establishing and maintaining that system. In the Australian context, I think something that has gone well has been at the University Foreign Interference Task Force. So that has been a collaborative effort between the universities and various Australian government agencies. So it includes research funders, but also sort of national security agencies and so forth. Yet to see really in over the medium and longer term whether or not that's been successful, but I think the foundations have been well set up, that it's there's a transparency of intent and a transparency of processes. So I think we're hoping that will be useful over time. Thanks.
Matt. All right, I have another question here. What tools exist to assist researchers in universities or in startups should they have a specific concern or find that they are having issues, such as may already be in bed with a bad actor. So how do they fix that kind of an issue? Are there any tools out there to support them on that front? And maybe I'll start with you, Rebecca.
So we, as a funding agency, we try to make it very, very clear about the communication mechanism back to us if there are any concerns. And we have an internal training process where we're educating our program officers on these issues so that when they are approached, they know how to address them and they know how to coordinate back with me. Something that I think we are thinking about and we need to address is in many university labs, there is a power dynamic. And it causes issues such as harassment and also issues such as uh, uh, graduate students and postdocs not feeling comfortable reporting when they have an issue. Often the senior researcher in a lab is very well respected, and others in the lab don't want to make any waves, even if they see an issue. This is exacerbated by the fact that many of our graduate students and postdocs are international, and they're very concerned that if they do say something, it might compromise their visa. And so we're thinking through how to establish an ombuds program similar to what many universities have for harassment, so that there is an entity to go to if there is something that you see that is questionable, that you need to consult on, and a reporting mechanism in association with that ombuds program. That's something else that is going to require funding, but we do think that that is going to be a positive step in the right direction. Um, Something that I think many universities are adapting to, but it's, in my view, a good step, is that the FBI has field offices across the country. And these FBI field offices are establishing very good connections and relationships with the universities in their jurisdiction. And they now, I think many universities are understanding that that is a mechanism they can use, where they can go to their local FBI office and consult as well if there's something risky or concerning that they find. Thank you.
Much for that. Mark, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. We have two government agencies linked as part of the intelligence world who have focused on academic and research security. We have a Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure and the Centre for Cybersecurity. And both of those directly engage and have mechanisms for researchers to attract their attention if they have a particular concern. And they are very good at triaging those cases so that they can identify whether something is very large, like a major cyber intrusion into the entire research faculty's computer system, or something that's just happened to a particular researcher on their laptop computer. So that mechanism is there at the moment. It's a bit of a fire brigade system though, and we're hoping that this field force I've already talked about is going to provide a much more consistent mechanism for people to raise concerns within and get the right advice. I mean, our field officers sometimes will just be hearing what the story is and then passing it on immediately to another agency to handle a particular case, or sometimes they'll be providing direct advice on how they should manage a particular concern. But that's where we're going. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Phil, anything you'd like to add?
I think so. I did work at the communication security establishment for a while. I won't say when, where, but so we have similar organizations to all of your countries in terms of looking at cyber threats and landscape and providing Canadian organizations, departments, private sector companies with things that they see that could be happening on research side as well as non-research side. And then we've got obviously Sherry's organization, which is also helping with intelligence and helping us understand the landscape. And so I guess when there are things that are happening, there's mechanisms within Canada, there, or at least I've seen, are in place in order to alert us and to take appropriate action. Internally, I think, we've talked a lot about education and awareness. I think that is a key piece. We're working on potentially developing an easy to use kind of step-by-step questions and answer perspective for the researchers to ask various questions to them that might determine how sensitive their research could be. So something easy to use, something we're used to in our day-to-day lives when either we're applying for a loan now or a credit card online or even insurance, something simple and easy available to researchers that might, help them with like an answer, oh, this is not so sensitive research. You're good to go and either collaborate in this fashion, or you're good to use these types of networks. You're good, something that gives them an answer based on the questions and how they answer them. Or this is really sensitive research. You probably need to think about these things, the types of information stores where you might want to be thinking about this should not be like Google Docs or something, so very specific information about where they should be doing their research based on some questions and answers. So hopefully if we can we've already kind of developed a framework for that, but now it's putting it into practice with a tool that allows them to easily answer these questions, I think could be helpful. So I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mel, any comments from your perspective?
Yeah, so we have in our Department of Home Affairs, we have a Counter Foreign Interference Coordination Centre that acts as kind of the focal point and the conduit between the intelligence agencies and universities and other kind of members of public or industry groups or so forth who have questions in relation to specific risks or specific approaches and so forth. So that's the place that we would direct universities and researchers to have a more informed conversation on specifics. There's sort of general guidance and people within universities and connected to the university's Foreign Interference Task Force as well. But it's CFIC that is kind of the front and centre in terms of outreach and engagement. Thanks.
For that. So I have another question for our panelists. Can you speak to economic security and competitiveness concerns relating to international collaborations? Are there any best practices that can assist with these issues? So I think you have answered some of that question, but I think it's an important piece to raise that awareness on the economic security and competitiveness piece that we've alluded to all along. So maybe I'll get Rebecca, you to start on that one, if you don't mind.
Sure. In my view, international collaboration, when it's principled international collaboration, enhances competitiveness and contributes to economic security. As we know, many of the great innovations that have helped us all come from these types of collaborations, as well as the expansion of knowledge. I think we need to, of course, be very conscious about how we collaborate with our competitors per se. And I think that collaboration is extremely important, even with economic competitors. But we need to be very careful and make sure that we can very well explain the benefit to our country and our country's researchers for collaborating with a perceived competitor, or a real competitor, I should say. For instance, we do have collaborative programs with countries where we have geopolitical tensions. And we need to be able to explain why we have those collaborations to our stakeholders. An example is we collaborate with several countries, including China, which I think for us is a very large competitor, in biodiversity research. And of course, that it's extremely important to our research community to have access to data and sites in China as well as other countries for biodiversity research. And so what we need to be careful, conscious, and selective about those types of collaborations and make sure we can convey what the benefit is, but we cannot, in my view, close ourselves off. Thank you.
Phil, do you have anything you'd like to add to that response?
I won't actually be adding too much on that because I don't think that's my area of expertise. But I did talk a little bit about, sort of an approach that could work, and that is, is there some ways we can, when people are trying to figure out who they want to collaborate with or which organization they want to collaborate with, is there a way to quickly and expeditiously do the review process? I think that's the piece that I think would be helpful. Is there lessons learned from other countries or other thoughts that have figured out how to, I don't know, quickly insert a date of birth and a name? I don't know, like I'm just speaking out loud, like quickly do that. And then, kind of like right now, how we do our I apply for a credit card, right? We put a piece of information and then 5 minutes later, I'm being told I'm approved for a $20,000 credit card. Is there a process we can kind of move forward together, like internationally, about how we can make that as simple as what I just suggested? I know that would mean a lot of, sharing agreements, and it might not be simple, but would that help us out? And without the researchers knowing, where that information came from for a deny or an accept, it's just a 0-1, go or no go. You don't need to give any more information other than, we highly recommend you don't go in this direction, and no other explanation is required. So I think that could be helpful. And we're talking about improving security and also improving collaboration. Quick responses of that nature might be helpful.
Thank you. Mark.
Well, it's exactly that we've been grappling with in the past few months, really, is how do we provide consistent and clear advice to researchers who want to do the due diligence checks? And clearly they've only got the internet and open source information to do that. But it's quite difficult to do. It's very easy to come up with a list of individuals or particularly institutions that would be undesirable to work with on a particular subject. But a lot of these institutions are very large. And there might be a 1 in one particular axis of a question and a 0 in another. And you risk being regarded as being inconsistent by the community if you can't explain why some of the, but very often, I think, as we all understand, your government can't say explain what it knows, which underlies the decision that it's just made. So creating something that is helpful, but at the same time provides consistent advice that can be easily understood is a bit of a problem for us at the moment.
Mel, anything in regards to economic security and competitiveness concerns from your perspective in international collaboration?
So I would just second what Rebecca said in the beginning. I think principled international collaboration is such a key part of the Australian research landscape. We're a small country. In order to participate in world-leading research, we have to engage in international collaboration. It's not an option to not do that. It is about how we do that in a principled and risk mitigated way. Certainly alive to concerns about kind of competitiveness and so forth, but we will always be looking outwards.
Isn't it? We're always alive to the competitiveness, but in order to move our research forward and get to where we need to be, we still need to pool resources. So it's that ability to be able to find the right balance in between who are we engaging with, what are their objectives, what are our objectives, and making sure that we go into these agreements with our eyes wide open so that we're not taken by surprise or being naive in our relationships as well, and that we're getting out of it what we need to get out of it from a national perspective or a research or university educational perspective. So I think that's something that we need to find that appropriate level of balance as we're moving forward. So I'll move on to another question here, and I think we have touched around this one a little bit as well, but it speaks to the cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is increasingly becoming an issue, and I think this raised its ugly head even more recently during the pandemic. But because it's become, cybersecurity is such a necessary means to protect research from unauthorized access and knowledge transfer, what cybersecurity issues or challenges are you currently seeing in any of your research systems or with any of the organizations that you are engaged with? Is there anything that you're seeing that's top of mind at the moment, other than ransomware? I think we were seeing ransomware all across the board these days. So maybe Mark, I'll start with you on that one. Anything from your perspective?
Well, we continue to counter deliberate attempts to access the research base that's continuing to do all this great work on COVID vaccinations and therapeutics. And the government's had to put quite a lot of resources into supporting those institutions in particular to make sure that they've got the firewalls and other protections that they need. And so that's really at the top of our mind, because, you know, helping the world get out of the COVID challenge is hugely important to us.
Agree with you there. I think that's important all across the board. Anything from your perspective, Mel?
I guess the cybersecurity space is not so much my domain, so I'll probably leave this one.
Okay, that's fair. Phil?
Sure. I think just I like to keep it simple again. Two things. We'll talk about the fact that you know, sensitive research is definitely of interest. I think you opened up with that, Sherry. You know, I think we're all aware of the typical ways that that people try to get into your network. You know, an email, download something, download a payload, put it somewhere. That payload can do numerous things. It can just create admin accounts, and then you can start to exfil as an administrator whatever you want. Or you can, from a ransomware account, a ransomware perspective, you know, people could download something that would encrypt all your data. So you still need to prevent those, and that's a lot of education. It's about making sure that your computers are patched. If you have whitelisting to stop executables from running, like those are the typical things. So I just share on that. And then the other thing could be even maybe something CSIS is also aware of is insider threats. So that's, you know, people can leverage a lot of information just by being allowed in your systems. And so what do you do from a cyber perspective to prevent, you know, data exfiltration, USB keys, you know, stop USB keys from being used on those networks that have sensitive information, maybe have monitoring that allows to see activity on your network to see, hey, how come we're all of a sudden seeing all sorts of data going to like outside this network for some reason or other? Why is that happening? So there's monitoring available for that. So I guess those are the two things, I guess, you know, the start of maybe outside and then the insider threat. There's tools and things that I think we need to educate ourselves on that either we need to invest in or put in place in order to minimize the probability and the impact of those two types of threats happening.
Rebecca, is there anything you'd like to add on that front?
Sure. We're just completing a study with the Jason group, and this is a group of academics who are experts in their own fields, and they do studies for the U.S. government in areas of intersection between science and national security. And this study, we will be releasing the executive summary of it in the near future. It focused on cybersecurity for NSF-funded major facilities. And one of the main findings is cyber attacks are ubiquitous. They occur all the time. And of course, that's extremely concerning, but it's becoming a fact of life right now. And so we need to take efforts to mitigate the effects of those cybersecurity attacks. we're finding that the attacks can threaten the integrity of the data. And of course, it's the data that is so valuable to our researchers from these facilities. And so we need to figure out ways to protect these. One of the main ways is by instituting standards for cybersecurity. And the U.S. National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, has released cybersecurity standards as well as best practices that academic institutions and facilities can follow. So we're encouraging the following of those standards. We know that they do need to be tailored to the uniqueness of each of the facilities, as well as to the characteristics of universities. But we think that it's extremely important that we focus on these. We're also focusing at NSF on reviewing cybersecurity practices, especially at our major facilities, and reviewing them on a regular basis. We want to, of course, not interfere with the operations of a facility, but we do feel that appropriate oversight is extremely necessary. We also have something we call trusted CI, trusted cyber infrastructure, which is a service that we offer to our grantees to review their cybersecurity practices and assist them in building up better cybersecurity. It's a challenge because this trusted CI effort needs to be scaled up. It doesn't have enough resources to do all that needs to be done, but it's a start, and we do offer that as a best practice as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Can I just say a little personal story that might help with this scenario? So my wife decided that she was tired of working and wanted to go back and do research and do her PhD. I won't tell you in which university, but just to tell you, back to my funding issue. Everything is digital, everything is cyber, yet there's just not the right amount of funding to properly secure. And really, she had to go and buy her own machine, her own laptop. And she could have gone to Best Buy, she could have gone anywhere. And only because, I've told her a little bit about what she could be doing to secure her machine and her environment. That she's probably doing some really good things, but I could just imagine that so many researchers across our countries are having to do their own thing, and that's because they have no other means to do it. And if we don't, give them the opportunity to purchase their own machines, there's no money in the system for them to actually have access to an environment or do it appropriately. So I just thought I would share that personal story that I'm assuming my wife is not alone in the way she has had to kind of solve her problem to be able to do research. And I really do think, at least at the university's perspective, where we're, the one that she's at, they probably just don't have the money or the funding to properly provide the tools and the environments for them to do secure research. So I guess I thought I would just share that. I thought that would be helpful, at least to explain what the problem or the issue probably is, to try to deal with cybersecurity on a big scale. You have to be able to try to figure out the fun.
No, thank you very much for that, Phil. I think that actually brings it right down to what the tactical issue and challenge is there's the funding, but there's the awareness and the knowledge and the support to make sure that all of these individuals have the support that they need in order to protect their systems. Because when somebody wants to come after a system, they can do it and they focus on it. And especially if you're looking at a foreign intel agency with all the capabilities that they can bring. So how can we actually help all of our researchers who are working from home now, or who are working from not as protected systems, actually get the protections around, or even to the point that they know if they've been penetrated, because sometimes that's part of the problem too, right? And then once they know, at least we can come in and figure out how to fix it and what we might have lost or they might have lost. So thank you very much for that. I think we have time for one more question. It sort of touches a bit on some of the things we've already talked about, but the question is, how does your organization manage intellectual property in international collaborations? And I think that's a challenge because, again, it's finding that balance. How do you share and not share? So maybe I'll start with you, Rebecca.
Project that NSF funds, we require a data management plan to be submitted. And that plan needs to outline how they are exactly going to do that, manage the data results and potential intellectual property that comes out of a research project. And that data management plan is actually reviewed competitively along with the rest of the project proposal. What we found is that as part of our review committee, we need to have data management experts that are on that so that we review that plan. I think it is extremely challenging, always with international collaboration in managing intellectual property and data release. So, my biggest advice is that the understanding of how one is going to manage data and the resulting data and intellectual property needs to be understood and in writing up front before even starting on the collaborative activities. I think the disputes over data and intellectual property ownership are some of the biggest risks in international collaborations and some of the biggest challenges that we've found when we have a major, large international research project. Often there are a lot of disputes among the researchers because it hasn't been clear from the beginning how these data are going to be managed. So again, it does have to be understood up front. And if one cannot agree with one's partners up front, then you have to question whether to pursue that international collaboration. Thank you.
Anything from your perspective, Mel?
At the ARC, we have it. IP arrangements are in the grant guidelines and in all kind of grant agreements. We don't really distinguish between international and domestic IP arrangements. So that's probably something for us to think about, and whether or not there's an additional lens we need to put over that. So interesting learning for me. Thanks.
That you don't distinguish between the two. I think we tend to do that here. Mark, anything from your perspective?
Well, I'll say now that we don't, I think, as far as I know, in terms of government policy, distinguish between the two. It's up to the universities to strike their own IP agreements, though, on a case-by-case basis. What we have done, though, is created template intellectual property agreements, which can be developed further, but they're all tailored to the research environment, and which are available online from our intellectual property office. And that, I think, has been very helpful in encouraging people to actually think about what the IP is that's likely to be generated and who will own it. Rebecca, you're absolutely right. You've got to think about these before you actually fund and start the work, because it's too late later on. Thanks.
Phil, anything from your perspective?
Well, at the NRC, we obviously have very well documented agreements for IP for our researchers and also our grant programs. So we do distinguish. We take care of who's going to own what and what the arrangements are. I really thought, though, that Rebecca's comment about the data arrangements was critical, and those are also in our agreements. So I'll just reemphasize that piece, and nothing really further to add on that.
Thank you very much for that. We're starting to run out of time. I think we're into our last 3 minutes. So what I'll do is I'm just going to ask each panelist maybe to give their final thoughts, maybe on what their research security priorities are moving forward in their respective countries. And we'll start maybe with you, Mark.
Well, my priority really is to press on with the culture change and the education process in universities. We've had quite a few changes imposed on the sector in various ways in the UK in the last 18 months, and it's time now to just make sure that those things are having the effect that we think that they are before we start moving out on additional measures and perhaps politically more attractive measures. It's just time to do the good work. Thanks.
Mel, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I think from us, we'd say awareness and embedding practices would be our priorities going forward.
Rebecca?
I'll talk about a priority as well as something that keeps me up at night. A priority is developing available training for the research community. And we are working together with the National Institutes of Health, Department of Defense, and Department of Energy to fund the development of external training modules that will be posted on the web and anyone can use in research security. And this will be in addition to the research security toolkit that I mentioned that the G7 is developing. And I hope that our training will be available by the end of next year, and that the toolkit will hopefully be available by spring of next year. What keeps me up at night is I think that research security issues are ever evolving, and it is like peeling back an onion. And we're continuing to peel back the onion to better understand what these risks are. And the risks are changing and growing as we speak. So I'm very concerned that we need to keep a pace on these issues. And we're not quite sure how to do that. But I think a major step in doing that is coordinating with like-minded partners and to better understand the risk. Thank you.
Phil, you get the last 30 seconds.
Well, it's been really an interesting ride over the last 8 months as a CIO of the NRC. All of the issues, have been discussed today are kind of top of mind for us. We're moving forward with an ambitious plan to set up the right tools and the right infrastructure, systems, et cetera, to support a lot of the things I said today. That being said, one of the reasons we've been in this problem or this issue is that you need ongoing funding, operational funding, to keep doing this properly. And I think that's the piece that, as a whole, all of our countries need to understand what that costs, to do it properly on an ongoing basis, instead of jumping up and down or being alerted when an incident happens that is either in the papers or is very public. I think somehow we have to figure out how to create that story for our politicians that our citizens are interested in, linking it to our citizens. Because unfortunately, we just had our speech from the throne here in Canada yesterday, and there were some interesting things, but it wasn't very focused. I didn't see very quickly that there was something about, hey, IP, knowledge-based economy, we need to protect it, and we need to do something about that. You could see where there could be some relevance to that, but right now I would say that we need to do a better job of linking the need for the ongoing protection and ability to create collaborative research collectively. So that's what I would say.
Much for that. That brings an end to this panel discussion, and I'd really like to thank all the panelists. I think it's given us a lot to think about. I'm taking away myself, being in an intelligence agency, very focused, of course, on protecting our research, but also appreciate the challenges from people right down at the tactical level. How do you do that security? How do we make sure that we're not preventing innovation and research by putting too many administrative burdens on everybody? How do we make sure that we're actually going into fair and equitable partnerships? So I really appreciate it. I think the idea here is we really need to continue putting the message out there, continue the education, but help everybody to find that balance. And the only way we can do that really is by all of us working together. So thanks again to the panelists. Mel, I know it's like 1 a.m. there or something, so you did really well.
2 a.m.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So thank you very much. And I think it's pretty late for you too, Mark. So appreciate everybody's attendance today.
It's only 3 p.m. here, but thank you.
Okay, that's not so bad as poor Mel.